The courtroom was unusually quiet that morning. Papers shuffled softly, shoes clicked faintly on the marble floor, and the low murmur of voices faded as the next case was called. Judge Frank Caprio sat at the bench, his glasses low on his nose, reviewing the file before him. Another parking citation, another small fine. It should have been routine. But then a trembling voice broke the calm. "Your Honor," the woman said, her tone unsteady but firm. "I'll pay any fine you want, but please don't let this ruin him." The words hung in the air like a crack of thunder in a church. Caprio looked up slowly. Standing before him was a woman in her 40s, her hands clutching a small folder to her chest. She looked exhausted, not just tired but worn down by life itself. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, her breath catching as she tried to steady herself. The courtroom, moments ago filled with the casual rhythm of minor cases, had fallen into perfect silence. Caprio adjusted his glasses, his expression softening. "Ma'am," he said gently, "let's start from the beginning. Who are we talking about?" She turned slightly, motioning toward the back of the courtroom. A young man barely 18 stood up nervously. His head was lowered, his shoulders tense. "My son Eli," she said, her voice cracking on his name. "He's all I've got left." Caprio's brow furrowed. He glanced down at the citation in front of him, several unpaid parking tickets, a modest fine, nothing out of the ordinary. But there was something in her voice that told him this wasn't just about money. He leaned forward. "Ma'am," he asked softly, "are you here about these tickets or is there something more I should know?" The woman hesitated, glancing at her son before answering. "I'm here for both of us, Your Honor. For him, and for what this means." Caprio tilted his head, sensing the weight behind her words. "Go on," he said quietly. She swallowed hard, her hands trembling. "I know it's just a ticket to most people. But to him, to us, it's more than that. He made a mistake. He's still learning. And I can take the blame, I can pay the fines, but please," her voice broke now, the emotion spilling through. "Please don't let this follow him. Don't let this one mistake take away his chance at something better." For a long moment no one moved. The clerk looked down. Even the bailiff seemed frozen. Caprio studied her face, the fear, the love, the quiet strength it took to stand there and beg not for herself but for her child. Something inside him shifted. He set the papers aside. "Mrs. Torres," he said softly, his tone different now, not the voice of a judge but of a man trying to understand. "Tell me what happened." The woman took a deep breath, her eyes never leaving her son. "It started with a car," she said. "And a promise I made." Before that morning in court, Angela Torres had spent most of her life trying to stay invisible, working quietly, paying her bills, never causing trouble. She was 43 years old, a single mother of 2, living in a small apartment on the south side of Providence. The walls were thin, the rent was high, and the noise from the street below never seemed to stop. But to Angela, it was home, the place where she tucked her children in after long nights and prayed they would never have to struggle the way she did. Her days began before sunrise and ended long after midnight. Every morning she put on her bakery uniform, tied her hair into a bun, and slipped out quietly so her children wouldn't hear the exhaustion in her voice. After her morning shift kneading dough and serving coffee, she'd rush home, switch into scrubs and head to her second job as a caregiver at a nursing home. She never complained, not to her coworkers, not to her friends, not even to her own reflection when the mirror showed more gray than brown in her hair. "I'm fine," she'd always say. "I have to be." Her oldest Eli had just turned 18. He was smart, kind, and still carried the quiet politeness that reminded her of his late grandfather. A year earlier, that same grandfather had left him his old car, a beat-up, faded sedan that rattled every time it stopped at a light. To Eli it was freedom. To Angela it was both pride and worry. She knew how much that car meant to him, but she also knew how expensive freedom could be. It started small, a ticket for street cleaning, another for an expired meter. Each one mailed under Angela's name, since the car was registered to her. At first she thought she could handle it, pay one next month, another the month after. But then came a hospital bill for her own mother, who had fallen ill and needed medication that insurance didn't cover. Then came a rent increase, then a broken water heater, then a choice, pay the fines or keep the lights on. She chose the lights. Weeks passed, then months. The tickets added up quietly, like a shadow growing longer with each passing day. When the final notice came, a summons to appear in court, Angela's hands trembled. She'd never even spoken to a police officer, let alone a judge. But she wasn't afraid of the courtroom itself. She was afraid of what might happen if Eli's name became tied to it. A boy with potential, already burdened by poverty. One mark on his record could take away the scholarships he'd been applying for, the dreams he'd started to believe in. So she made a choice only a mother could understand. She would take the blame. She would stand before the judge, admit to the fines, and pay whatever it took to keep her son's future untarnished. That morning she put on her cleanest blouse, borrowed bus fare from a neighbor, and walked into the courthouse with shaking hands but a steady heart. When she took her place before Judge Frank Caprio, she wasn't there as a defendant. She was there as a mother, one who refused to let life take one more thing from her family. Judge Caprio flipped through the file, his eyes moving slowly down the page. Each ticket was neatly listed: street cleaning, expired meter, improper parking. Small fines that had snowballed into a painful sum. He adjusted his glasses, then looked up at Angela, who stood quietly at the podium, her fingers gripping the folder against her chest like it was the only thing holding her together. "Miss Torres," he began gently, "it seems you have several unpaid tickets here. They go back quite a few months." Angela nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, Your Honor." Caprio's tone was not harsh but curious. "Why didn't you come in sooner? You've had plenty of time to resolve these." She swallowed hard, her eyes dropping to the floor. "I meant to, sir. Her words trailed off, the weight of exhaustion pressing against her chest. She knew that no explanation could truly capture the chaos of her life. The long shifts, the bills that never stopped coming, the nights she fell asleep at the kitchen table with unopened envelopes beside her. But before she could continue, a voice from the back of the courtroom broke through the silence. "It was me, Your Honor." Caprio paused mid-sentence, his eyes lifting from the file. The courtroom turned. In the second row, a young man stood nervously, his hands shaking slightly as he clutched the edge of the bench in front of him. It was Eli. His voice was steady but his eyes were filled with fear. The judge's expression softened but grew more serious. "And you are her son," he said. "Eli Torres." Caprio nodded slowly. "I see. So what do you mean by 'it was me'?" Eli's voice cracked as he spoke. "The tickets, they're mine. I parked the car, not her." A quiet gasp rippled through the courtroom. Angela turned toward her son, her face pale. "Eli, no," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Sit down, please." But he didn't. He kept his eyes on the judge, standing tall despite the fear that quivered through him. "I didn't mean to get her in trouble. I didn't even know the tickets were under her name until she told me about the court date." Caprio looked from mother to son, the room heavy with unspoken emotion. "So you're saying you're the one responsible for all of this?" Eli nodded. "Yes, sir. Every single one." Angela's hands tightened on her folder. "Your Honor, please," she said quickly. "He doesn't understand how it works. The car is in my name. It's my fault for not keeping track." Caprio leaned forward slightly, his tone still calm. "Miss Torres, your son is trying to take responsibility. Are you saying he's mistaken?" She hesitated, the pause said more than any words could. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "He's just a boy, Your Honor. He doesn't deserve to carry this." The judge studied her for a moment. There was something familiar in her defiance, the quiet, unstoppable force of a parent's love. "You're protecting him," he said softly. Angela shook her head quickly. "I'm protecting his future," she said. "He's worked so hard. He's applying for scholarships, trying to stay out of trouble. I can pay the fines, I just can't let this follow him." Caprio turned to Eli, who looked as though he might collapse under the weight of his own guilt. "Son," the judge asked gently, "why didn't you say something sooner? Why let your mother take the blame?" Eli's eyes glistened. "Because she's already lost so much," he said quietly. "My dad died when I was 13. She's been doing everything for us since then. I didn't want to disappoint her again." Angela's lips parted, but no sound came. Tears filled her eyes. The courtroom remained silent. No coughs, no whispers, just the sound of two hearts breaking in the space between them. Judge Caprio sat back, his expression grave but compassionate. In that moment he wasn't just looking at a file, he was looking at a family held together by sacrifice and silence. He saw a mother who would rather carry the world's weight than let her son stumble under it, and a son who loved her enough to finally step forward, even if it meant facing judgment. For the first time in a long while, Caprio didn't know what to say. The law was clear, but this moment wasn't about the law, it was about love and the cost of protecting it. He leaned back, his hands folded on the bench. His gaze softened, but his eyes carried a deep sadness. "Miss Torres," he said carefully, "I've been on this bench for a long time. I've heard every reason, Every excuse, every story you can imagine. But I have to ask, why are you so determined to take the blame for something you didn't do? Angela's hands shook as she held the folder tighter. Because, Your Honor, she said, her voice trembling, I can live with debt. But he shouldn't have to live with regret. The courtroom went still. Even the hum of the lights faded into silence. Caprio's face softened. Regret? He repeated quietly. Angela nodded, tears glimmering in her eyes. My son has spent most of his life trying to fix things he didn't break. When his father died 2 years ago, he took it the hardest. He was 16, but he grew up overnight. He started working part-time, helping me with rent, taking care of his little sister. The car, that old thing, it was from his grandfather. It made him feel free. He used it to drive me to work every morning, to pick me up after long shifts. He thought he was helping me. Her voice cracked now, the pain rising with each word. He thought he was helping me, and now it's hurting him. She turned slightly, glancing at her son. He's just a boy, Your Honor. He's done everything right. I can handle a fine, but I can't handle watching him lose faith in himself. Judge Caprio leaned forward, his elbows on the bench, his expression unreadable. You remind me of my own mother, he said finally, his voice softer than before. She used to say that sometimes love means breaking rules. Angela's tears finally fell. She covered her mouth, shaking silently. Even the bailiff looked away, his jaw tightening. Caprio took a long breath, then spoke again. I want both of you to come up here. Eli hesitated. Sir? Both of you, he repeated, motioning gently. They approached the bench slowly, mother and son, side by side. Angela's hand brushed Eli's arm as if to steady him. Caprio looked at them for a long time before he spoke. His voice was calm but heavy with feeling. This courtroom, he said, was built for justice. But today it will be guided by grace. No one breathed. You see, he continued, justice is about rules, but grace is about understanding. What you've shown here, both of you, isn't defiance. It's love. It's sacrifice. And that deserves to be seen. Angela wept openly now, her shoulders shaking. Eli turned toward her and wrapped his arms around her as she cried. Caprio smiled faintly. Eli, he said softly, your mother's right, debt fades. But regret stays. Don't let her carry yours anymore. From this moment on, you carry her. Judge Caprio sat silently for several moments after that, the weight of emotion thick in the room. His fingers rested on the file, but his mind was far from paperwork. He looked up finally, his voice steady. Miss Torres, you've given me a lot to think about. I've heard many stories in this courtroom, but yours reminded us what this place is really for. He took a slow breath. The law tells me to fine you, to enforce the rules, to issue a penalty. But I've learned that sometimes enforcing the law isn't the same as serving justice. He paused, glancing around the courtroom, his gaze sweeping across faces filled with awe and empathy. Justice isn't always punishment, he said. Sometimes it's understanding what people are carrying when they make a mistake. And today what I see is not defiance. I see a family that's been holding on, doing their best. He looked back to Angela and Eli. You reminded us that mercy isn't weakness. Mercy is strength. Angela wiped her eyes, her tears now replaced by disbelief. Caprio smiled softly. Your fines are dismissed. You owe nothing. The courtroom erupted in quiet gasps. But he wasn't done. Starting today, he said, his tone lifting, we're beginning something new, the Community Compassion Fund. It'll help families like yours, funded not by punishment but by generosity. People will give not because they must but because they can. Angela's hand covered her mouth. Eli blinked, stunned. Caprio leaned forward. Son, he said, your mother carried you into this courtroom. Now it's time for you to carry her out. The room filled with applause, soft, emotional, full of admiration. Angela sobbed openly, wrapping her arms around her son. You didn't have to save me again, Mom, Eli whispered. She smiled through her tears. That's what mothers do. Caprio's eyes glistened as he whispered, yes, that's exactly what mothers do. Weeks later, the story of that courtroom moment began to spread far beyond Providence. It started as a small article in the Providence Journal, titled simply, Judge Frank Caprio Breaks Tradition After Mother's Plea. But within days it was everywhere, on national news, morning talk shows, and social media feeds. People couldn't stop talking about the woman who stood before a judge and reminded an entire city what mercy truly meant. Clips of the hearing went viral online. Millions watched as Angela's trembling words, I can live with debt, but he shouldn't have to live with regret, echoed through the world's screens. Viewers wrote comments like, "This is what humanity looks like," and "I wish every courtroom had a heart like his." But the most powerful outcome wasn't the attention, it was the action. Within a week, donations began flooding into Judge Caprio's newly launched Community Compassion Fund. People from across the country, some from as far as Australia, sent checks, online contributions, and handwritten letters saying they wanted to help families like Angela's. A single act of empathy had turned into a movement. The fund began clearing small fines for struggling parents, single mothers, veterans, and caretakers, people trying their best to stay afloat. Each case wasn't dismissed because of pity, but because someone believed they deserved one more chance. One local news anchor called it the kindness ripple. Another headline read, "One judge, one mother, one nation inspired." When reporters asked Judge Caprio what had moved him to create the program, he smiled thoughtfully and said, "She broke the rules of this courtroom, and taught us all something about love." He paused, then added softly, "I just hope she knows what she started." Angela, meanwhile, returned quietly to her life. She didn't see herself as a hero. She was just a mother who spoke from the heart. But now her story had become a symbol, proof that compassion doesn't end at the bench. It lives wherever people choose understanding over judgment. As the story closes, the narrator's voice lingers gently over footage of the courthouse, sunlight spilling across the polished wood floors, the faint hum of the city outside. "Sometimes justice is blind," the voice says, "but compassion sees everything." Then a soft invitation. Friends, if this story moved you, share it with someone who still believes kindness can change the world. Because one mother's plea didn't just free her son, it changed the meaning of justice. And just before the screen fades to black, a final line appears, a quiet promise of what's to come. In our next episode, a veteran's final wish leaves Judge Caprio speechless.